So what do you think, like, our job as professional dog trainers to keep learning is, and what I mean by that is, like, when does learning stop past just staying current on new methods coming on the scene?
Never.
Does that question make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And the answer is never. And I would say because dog training in itself, Brent and I are going to be doing a really cool seminar coming up next month with Michael Ellis. And it's surrounding a very similar topic here, which is, even if you've absolutely like mastered your realm of dog training and you can get your hands on this dog and you can figure it out, you still always have to improve as a teacher. You still always have to improve as an educator. And something that a new mentor for me, but a guy who I admire very much, his name is Dr. Stuart Hilliard, and he's the guy who runs the breeding and training program for the Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. And he's a fucking genius. He was explaining as part of a 5-day long symposium that they did. He was explaining not only be able to speak and explain these things like analytically, but also in story, because you have to pass the message, and stories have always kind of culturally helped people gain knowledge. But then once you can do all that and you can juggle all that, then you have to throw another ball in there, which is learn how to be very picky and specific with the terminology you use, right? And I commented that to you when we spoke last time, was like, you're very clever with your words, right? And that's because you have to get granular with what are we delineating or what are we identifying. And that's kind of a skill in itself, because when we start to get more analytical, like when we run studies and stuff like that, a mislabeled issue here could flip the whole outcome of what people saw. And so there's never going to be an end to it. It'll take people lifetimes over and over again. And as stuff keeps evolving, it's going to continue to do so.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. Like, if you look at, I think it's the Myers-Briggs test, right, where they look at like personality traits in people and stuff. Like, I don't know how many combinations of personality there are, but I think there's tons.
Depends what model you're using.
Yeah. But there's so many different type of person out there, right? And every single one of them, receives information in a different way. And that's one of the things, like, with my trainers at the facility, like, I'm coaching them through constantly. And I've said since the very beginning is, like, when I look at other trainers at this point, obviously you want to be aware of methods, and that, like I was saying in it, like, staying current on like new methods or new trends and stuff like that in dog training, I think is very important. But more importantly, everybody has such a distinct way of articulating information and for better choice of words, like branding that information in a way that resonates with different people, which is why when you look at characters like, say, the Dog Daddy or, Zach George or Tom Davis or Larry Kroner, like any of these guys, their methods inherently aren't so different. You know what I mean? Like, there's definitely some major differences between them, but the way they brand and package that information and put it out into the world is really where the magic happens and where their followings come from. And each one of them has such different audiences that likes them. And being able to understand all of those things individually, I think, is a never-ending game and a never-ending skill that we have to be mastering,
Exactly.
Well, and that kind of brings this point, like, will we ever master it? That's kind of this idea. And then one big thing that Dr. Stuart Hilliard mentioned, and I think this is just important for dog trainers and dog owners to understand as well, just as humans, is a lot of times we're arguing over a technique, right? We're arguing over a tool or am I pivoting? Am I clicking? Am I feeding for engagement? Like, what am I doing? You got to remember, every single technique belongs within a system. Yeah. Right. And I think 100%. The mistake with a lot of dog trainers is they learn a technique and they try to put that square technique into their round system that they already know. And they're wondering, like, I see that it's helpful. So like I had the advantage over 10 years, like after learning Keeler method, then I learned that whole system. And then I said, okay, I'm not going to do Keeler with certain puppies. All I'm going to do is food work. So I studied the shit out of Ian Dunbar. I did everything that Ian Dunbar did. Only food. I didn't put a correction on a dog under 6 months for a long time. Yeah. And I saw the limitation, and I had to measure every system, and I had to measure, like, what is the advantage? What's the disadvantage? What's the time advantage? What's the time disadvantage? What is the downstream, benefits? What's the downstream disadvantages, right? And like when you measure each system and you study them as a system, then you get it. Then you're able to be like, okay, now I can switch right here, right? But a lot of times we're just learning methods because unfortunately on social media, if that's, if YouTube University is where you learn shit, you only got 5 to 10 minutes to keep someone's attention, and you can only teach a technique, right? You can't actually teach a whole system.
That is a beautiful way of articulating all of that, and that's why, let's look at it from like a client perspective. Like I'm sure you guys have experienced this as dog trainers, is the clients who are very, very active with their dogs. Obviously, they're very active in educating themselves on different things, and they do what I'll almost refer to as kind of like trainer hopping a little bit, which is where they'll talk to like 5 different trainers to get advice all at once on their situation, and then they try to apply all of those individual methods all at once, and they wind up confusing the ever living fuck out of the dog, right, and themselves,
or themselves, client,
right, which is exactly that, right? Like people ask like, well, how did you get your system? Because everybody has their own kind of like spin on things, right? Sure. And it's an accumulation, I think, of, when I was early on in dog training, it was the same deal, right? Like I would learn and try to replicate what somebody was doing to the best of my abilities, with the best knowledge that I had, and do it completely, and then see where the limitations were with it, just like you did with where you saw like with a Dunbar approach or the Keeler method approach or any of those types of things. And as you do that enough and you understand not just the method, but the why behind the method in conjunction with that particular system, then you could understand how to take those pieces and apply it into your system in a way where it works, right? But if you don't understand deeply the why behind those methods, like why is that working right now, or why is that not working right now, or why did this individual put it in that exact spot where they would do it, right? You're always going to be lost when you run into a hurdle with it, right? And where it doesn't work, you won't know how to kind of bob and weave and ultimately make it work.
Yep. And I would say there's a lot of so this weekend we were with Michael Ellis, and we were going over one of the modules of our seminar, and one of the modules is called Master Your Material, right? And I would say I've worked with a lot of dog trainers and interviewed a lot of dog trainers and helped a lot of dog trainers, and not everyone has this mentality where they want to like dig deeper and dig deeper and dig deeper and ask why, but why, like a really curious child. And I think I always believe like, and this could just resonate with human nature, but when you keep asking why, like why should I do this? Okay, well, why am I doing that? Okay, well, why am I doing it? At some point you will connect to some universal truth, right? Whether it's like a scientific truth or like just something. And a lot of people don't try to anchor what they learn to a universal truth. They just kind of go like, well, I mean, that's what Shaughnessy said. So, or that's what so-and-so said, or, and then they just kind of roll with it and it happens to work, but they still don't really understand why it's working or why it's not working. And so that's kind of not everyone is built that way.